Good afternoon and welcome to Sheep Speaks. I'm going to be reading out of out of Sheep Speaks, my memoir. It's my testimony of what happened to me in my life. And if you were with us last week, I started this last week on chapter 1, and I read that through. And you left us off last week where myself, my friend Christy, and Sharon had decided at 11 or 12 years old to hitchhike from Houston to Galveston, Texas. And so we had gotten in the back seat of a car with a couple of older men, and we were headed on about 50 miles down the road to Galveston. And so that's where we're picking up our story today. This is chapter 2, and the title of this is Growing Up. So as Christy, Sharon, and I sat quietly in the back seat, the men began to ask us a lot of questions, and we started to feel a little uneasy. I couldn't wait to get to Galveston, although we weren't sure what was about to happen. We did arrive safe and sound in Galveston. We finally got out of the car, and one of the men handed Sharon a card. We were all giggling at this point. I said, "Well, what does it say?" And we all got an eerie feeling as she read the words on that card. The words were, you may tie your shoes this morning, but someone else may untie them tonight. And I said, oh no, they were morticians. That was what was on their card. And I said, ooh, and all of us screamed in unison, completely freaked out. The three of us continued to stay friends as we grew up, and our foolishness got worse, to say the least. As we got older, we could put ourselves in even more dangerous situations. It was common practice for all of us girls to tell our parents that we were spending the night with each other, which left us free to do pretty much anything we wanted, that our vivid imagination could come up with. My friend Sharon really didn't have to make excuses anymore, as her parents divorced and her mother moved to their lake house out in the country. And Sharon chose to live with her dad because he was staying in the city where she had always lived and gone to school. Sharon's dad was a longshoreman and was away from home weeks at a time. So at the age of 13, she was, for all intents and purposes, living by herself. Sharon and her dad had also moved to a dangerous side of town on the east side of Houston. By this time, we were trying to get a few extra dollars anywhere we could to buy acid and mescaline on the weekends. I skipped lunch and saved my money all week in order to have my meager drug money on the weekends. We had friends, some of them in their 20s, so drugs were almost always readily available. One particular week, I remember there was a lot of talk going around about this certain dose of mescaline, which was really powerful. So we sought out the boys who were selling that to make sure we got some before it sold out. I had mine in hand before all was gone. A lot of us hung out at a drive-through restaurant, and it was a hamburger place, on the weekends, and there were opportunities to go here and there and yonder with someone who actually had a car. I was with Sharon and her boyfriend and a couple of his friends riding around in their old van. And remember, this was back in the 60s and 70s when people drove those old vans all the time. And I had taken my much sought after capsule of mescaline about an hour before. So when it began to kick in, I was really surprised. It was very much more powerful than anything I had ever taken before. I had taken acid a lot of times, but this time was very different. Really different. I was starting to hallucinate. I would look out the window of the van and the grass would turn into green and red, and it was in the shape of pyramids, which grew to 80, 100, 500 feet tall. It seemed the world was splitting up into pieces because of these pyramids. Terrified, I decided to just close my eyes. Well, that did not work out well at all. It was about 10 times worse, actually. I couldn't open my eyes fast enough, so I looked at the guy driving the van, and he started splitting into a million pieces. There was nothing I could do to make it stop or to get any relief. I began screaming, and all of my friends tried to calm me down, telling me it wasn't real, that this was just the mescaline. But I didn't care. I was terrified. I thought surely this would stop soon, but it didn't. It was after midnight, and I knew there was no way I could go home in this condition. I told them, "You can't take me home. I can't go home like this." And they insisted that they had to go home. There were still a few people at the hamburger place where we parked at. And so as it turned out, the only people left were a couple of guys who liked to race cars and had muscle cars. I knew them, but not very well. And there were a few other people there, stragglers who didn't have to be home so early. Sharon's boyfriend told these guys what was happening with me, how I was so stoned I couldn't go home, but that they had to leave. So Sam, the guy with the muscle car, said he knew some people who were renting a hotel room to have a party that night, and that he could take me over there. I was all for it because I knew I could not go home in the condition I was in. So I got in the car with Sam, and he took me to the hotel. I didn't know any of the people, but I didn't care. They were just some random teenagers getting high and partying. By this time, I was half out of my mind with fear. And this dragged on for hours. But it seemed to be getting better when I was inside, when I didn't have to look at the grass. Out of everything I experienced during the hallucination, the grass scared me the most. I just sat in the corner in that hotel room, wrapped up in a blanket, grateful that I had a place to stay until this stuff wore off. One good thing did come out of this horrible experience. You know, God has a way of doing that, making good come out of bad. I made up my mind right then and there that night that I would never take another dose of acid or mescaline. From that point on, for years, I would not even let someone open a bottle of Coke for me or anything for me. If someone else opened my drink, I was afraid that they would put some drug in it and I would have this experience again. God has a way of protecting us even before we know who He is. Amen. It wasn't too long after this that my best friend Becky and I and another girl named Kathy started hanging around with this older boy we had met at the park. Ricky didn't go to school or have a job, so he was pretty much available to take us wherever we wanted to go in his van. Like I said earlier, vans were, for some reason, pretty popular back in the 60s and 70s. I really don't remember why, but Becky, Kathy, and I decided it would be a good idea to run away, even though we didn't have anything to run away from. It wasn't like we were living in abusive situations or had a bad home. You know, we just decided that was a good idea. Ricky was 19, and we were all about 15 years old by now. So we thought, why not? Let's go to California. That's where all the cool people live, after all. Well, since Ricky was available, why not ask him to take us? So we came up with a plan. I was a good planner, but I never counted the cost or considered the consequences of the things that I planned. We picked a day to leave, packed a few clothes, and headed for California. The only problem was none of us had any money. So Ricky would go into a store in his oversized jacket and steal a carton of cigarettes. We would then take out a few packs to smoke and then go to another store to return the cigarettes to get our quote-unquote money back. I'm not proud of any of this, but this was my life, and as sad as it was. We could pretty much try almost anything. We would almost try almost anything because we had a severe lack of fear. We were just too young and too stupid to be afraid, amen. As crazy as our ideas were, I'm tempted to believe that some of Ricky's ideas topped ours in the crazy department. His van had a manual transmission, and none of us girls knew how to drive a stick shift. And as we were nearing Ozona, Texas, heading west, we realized we needed gas. We were far from any city, and there was no store around so that Ricky could steal cigarettes. So he came up with this harebrained idea. One of us girls should drive to the gas station and tell the store attendant at the gas station a story about how we got separated from our husband at a restaurant and needed to meet him up the road. He suggested we say that while we were having lunch, his wallet was stolen and we didn't have any money and didn't know what we were going to do. Crazy, right? But Becky and Kathy said absolutely not. They were not driving that van. None of us knew how to drive it. So Ricky said, look, I will lay on my back in between the seats and shift the gears. All you have to do is press in the clutch. I was like, okay, I can do that. But now I had to be the one to tell the attendant the sob story, because Ricky and the other two girls had to stay out of sight. That day, the Texas wind in the hill country was blowing like crazy. But we pressed on with our plan. Believe it or not, we pulled it off, or so we thought. We got our gas and pulled back onto the highway. The wind was blowing the van all over the road. I told Ricky I needed to pull over and let him drive. He insisted I needed to practice driving, so he wouldn't let me pull over. I kept driving, but the wind was getting worse, and I couldn't keep the van in one lane to save my life. The next thing we heard was the police siren, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the red lights flashing. Amen. That's the end of chapter 2. You'll have to come back next week for chapter 3. And I just appreciate you stopping by today. I'd like to invite you to go to my website at www.asheepspeaks.org. And there I have a link to my YouTube channel, which has over 100 videos. I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe, like, and share my videos. It helps me out a lot. And next week, it will be on chapter 3. Miracles, past, present, and future. And what I'm endeavoring to do is read a chapter out of this book, A Sheep Speaks, every Tuesday, the Lord willing. And then on Sundays, I give a lesson out of my Apples of Gold, a devotional and rhyme, which I just take a verse, and I had written a little poem under it, and then I try to get some coinciding scriptures that will hopefully minister to your heart on Sundays at 2 o'clock. So I really appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.